Hi everybody. I want to share some thoughts about this week's Parashat VaYishlach. In this Parsha, we have many of the famous stories about Yaakov. His encounter with Esav after the brachot, his wrestling with an angel where his name is finally changed to Yisrael, and the story of Dinah and the tragedy that befell her in Shechem. What I want to focus on, though, is 10 very interesting psukim that are right after the story in Shechem. As soon as the story of Shechem ends, Hashem comes to Yaakov and says the following to him. And I'm reading from Perek Lamed Hey Pasuk Aleph. Vayomer Elokim el Yaakov, kum alei Beit El, v'shav sham, v'aseh sham mizbeach la'el, hanireh elecha, v'varchecha mipnei Esav achicha. Hashem basically commands Yaakov to leave right away. Kum alei, almost like immediately after what happened in Shechem, he needs to get up. And he needs to go to Beit El, which remember is where Yaakov had previously visited. That's the story, or where he had the vision with the ladder that took place in Bereshit, Perek Chavchet, and that he should give a mizbeach there to Hashem, this God who he saw when he was running away from Esav. Vayomer Yaakov el Beito ve'el kol asher imo hasiru et Elohei hanekar asher b'tochachem v'hitiru ve'achlifo simotechem. And then Yaakov does something very interesting. His first point of action before he goes to Beit El, is he goes to his whole household and he says to them, you must remove all of the foreign gods that are in your midst and purify yourself and change your clothes. He then goes on and explains to everybody, V'nakumu v'na'aleh Beit El, v'aseh sham mizbeach la'el, ha'oneh oti b'yom tzarati, v'yehi imadi b'derech asher halachti. And he tells them that they're going to go up to Beit El, and there they will make a mizbeach, because they want to make a mizbeach to the God who answered him biyom tzarati, and the dame of my trouble, vayehi imadi, and Hashem was with me, baderech asher halachti, on the way that I walked. And so what does Yaakov do? In Perek Dalet it describes that they give him all of the Elohei Nekar, and he takes them and also some jewelry that they had, and they bury them outside of a tree right out in the outskirts of Shechem. And then they all go ahead and they get to Beit El. And what happens when they finally get to Beit El? When they get to Beit El, and I'm reading from Pasuk Tet, Vayira Elohim El Yaakov Od Bivo'o Mipadan Aram Vayivarech Oto. So Hashem sees that he finally has arrived there and he blesses him. And then Hashem says the following, Vayomer Lo Elokim Shimcha Yaakov Lo Yikra Shimcha Od Yaakov Ki Im Yisrael Yihiyah Shimcha. Vayikra et Shemo Yisrael. And so Hashem basically says to Yaakov, your name will no longer be just Yaakov, but it will also be Yisrael. And from now on, you will be called Yisrael. Now, this is very interesting for a variety of reasons. One is what is this whole thing with having to go to Beit El, which is a place that they already visited? And it is explained somewhat here. But it's interesting to see that Yaakov is sort of asked to backtrack at the start of his journey and to go back to that original place where he had that original vision with the ladder. Second, what is this whole thing with his whole family that they had this Elohei Nekar, that they had these foreign gods? And actually, when you look at the Mefarshim, it says that it was Avodah Zarah, and that's why they're specifically commanded V'hi Taharu, that they actually have to purify themselves from doing Avodah Zarah. And presumably, this was Avodah Zarah that they somehow came into possession of or were using when they were in Shechem. And lastly, the name. We know that originally Yaakov was actually given this name when he had his encounter with the angel, and that angel, or that, Ish Elokim. And there, the pasuk says, and this is in Perek Lamed Bet, in pasuk Chavtet, he says, Vayomer lo Yaakov Yemar Od Shimcha, no longer will your name be Yaakov, Ki Im Yisrael, but rather it will be Yisrael. Ki sarti im Elokim v'im anashim vatuchal, right? Because you fought with, or you strove with God and with man, and you have overcome. And so here we see, why does Hashem have to re-give Yaakov this name? And I think something very interesting is going on here. What I think we see is really that Yaakov was basically given an opportunity from Hashem to almost start over again. He's had, even on his journey, which began with that vision, with the sulam, with the ladder, and Hashem promised to be with Yaakov with whatever was going to happen with him subsequently. Yet Yaakov still really had a hard time. His meeting with Esav was complicated. He has this encounter with some type of divine being, and he's sort of given this interesting name that isn't necessarily super complimentary. In fact, what it's really saying is that he's sarti, right? That you fight. And then finally, we have the tragic story of what happened to Dinah and Shechem. And I think what's happening here is that in what a way Hashem is communicating to Yaakov is that a person can always, in a way, start over again. And that's why he's really telling him to revisit Beit El. And he's sort of, Hashem is giving the name again. And here the Mefarshim say that what does Yisrael mean? It does not mean that Yaakov was fighting, but really that he is a sar, that Yaakov is a prince, that Yaakov is deserving of the brachot that Hashem gives him. And finally, we need to deal with the piece about this Elohei Nekar, this idol worship that seemed to have taken place. And I think here, it's not just that we are always afforded opportunities to do a do-over, but before we get to do the do-over or to revisit the past and reframe it in a different way to go towards our future, there's hard work that has to be done. We really have to do a cheshbon. We really have to do an evaluation and take stock of what is around us now in our life that maybe led us to where we were at this particular point. And I think that's what Yaakov does with his family. Yes, he's given a commandment to immediately go to Beit El, but he looks around and he sees, look at what has happened to my family, and particularly in Shechem. And he basically tells his family, before we can go on to the next part of our journey, where we know that we will be able to encounter God again and to give him Mizbeach and to give thanks, we have to do the hard work. We have to do the piece of V'hi Taharu. We have to purify ourselves again. I think this is a beautiful lesson that we can learn from the story of Yaakov, right? That there are always going to be times in life where maybe we have gone off the path that we were really supposed to be on. But there's always an opportunity of V'hi Taharu. There's always an opportunity for purification. But in order to have that do-over or to re-see the future in a different way, and maybe it's even important to revisit those things of the past. And for Yaakov, it was to go back to Beit El. It was to revisit that name of Yisrael. In order for those things to really happen and to be meaningful, we have to actually do the hard work of purifying ourselves, of reframing, of making sure that everything around us is what it needs to be. And so I think this is often some overlooked psukim here, but I think really tell us something so interesting about Yaakov, that no matter what tragedies befall him, he's always willing to do that hard work, to bring his family along in that hard work, and then finally, he deserves that name of Yisrael in the way that it was meant to be, that he's actually a prince. Shabbat Shalom.